And super happy to be back. I can't really see anyone because of the lights, but super happy to see you here. And it's also super exciting to see from the survey before this, there are 70% of you are actually first time attending Vuejs Amsterdam. So I'm super happy to be here again and sharing about 10 years of Vuejs, right? So we just celebrated the 10-year public anniversary of Vuejs. This month, in fact, because Vuejs was first publicly announced in February 2014. So, actually, when this happened, I am quite amazed myself that we've been doing this for 10 years. It sounds a very, very long time in JavaScript or front-end world in general, because I think 10 years ago, people were complaining there's a new framework coming out every single day. And to do MVC had like 50 different implementations, and Vuejs was just one of them. And there were, I still remember when I first posted Vuejs on Hacker News, a lot of the comments were like, oh, great, another framework. I don't know if this is going to be around the next year this time. Turns out we're still here after 10 years. So, woo! So, some numbers about Vuejs today in numbers. So these numbers, I combine both the Vuejs 2 repo and Vuejs 3 repo. Two repos combined, we have over 9,000 commits. And of course, there are more projects under the Vue.js organization. I didn't do the full counting because there are so many different things going on under the organization. So we're going to just focus on the stats for Vue Core alone. Vue Core had over 490 releases on NPM over the 10 years. 2 million plus users worldwide. This is based on the stats from our DevTools extension. 2 repos combined with 250,000 plus GitHub stars, 4.6 million plus weekly NPM downloads, and 1 billion plus monthly CDN requests on JS Deliver. Yeah, so I don't, to be honest, at a certain point, I stopped caring about GitHub stars or these download numbers, but it's a special timing. So still, I think it's great to sort of have a snapshot of how things are going at this point. Just also give everyone an idea. And we did create a lot of technical impact. I'm not here to brag about it, but there are some things I do want to talk about because I think some of these kind of get lost over the time when things first came out, when we first discover an idea or we first experiment something, right? Sometimes it would become kind of buried in the history where people know this thing exists but not quite sure who invented it first. So there are a few things that Vuejs did come up with first. Like we were the first to do deep reactivity-based tracking-based reactivity, right? So when you have an object in Vuejs, you just mutate it, arbitrary depth, and things will stay reactive. We were actually the first framework to do that by actually tracking the real changes. Right? Angular was doing deep reactivity, but it was based on dirty checking, and Vuejs was really the first one to decide, okay, like maybe we can actually make the thing really reactive. We were also the first to combine the idea of single-file components with build tools. The idea of single-file components, I wouldn't say Vuejs was the first to invent it. There were other, in fact, Vuejs was the single-file components of Vuejs was inspired by internal experimentation at Google. But we were the first to combine the idea with popular build tools like Webpack and Browserify, if people still remember that. And we were able to do build time transformations to convert a single-file component into plain JavaScript that the browser can understand. Which nowadays is really pretty common because once that becomes a reality, becomes a common practice, more and more different formats started to pop up. So you see nowadays we have custom formats like Astro, Svelte, and people transforming JSX into different things. So single-file components really kind of paved the way for this kind of concept. Composition API in Vuejs 3 was the first to combine signal-style reactivity with modern component models. This might sound a bit convoluted, but the idea here is a lot of frameworks today are convergent on the concept of signals, which is if you've never heard of the term, is loosely equivalent to refs in Vue's reactivity system. So Signal is quickly becoming the sort of shared standard based reactivity model for a lot of different frameworks. Solid.js, Svelte 5 is moving to Signals, Angular adopted Signals, Preact has Signals, right? So pretty much only React is the one that doesn't want to do Signals, but the idea here is Composition API was the first one to actually allow you to use a signal-based reactivity model with a modern component model, right? And we were also first to explore compiler-powered reactivity sugar for signals in the form of reactivity transform. Some of you might have used it before. Unfortunately, we eventually decided this may not be the best direction for Vue. So we gave up on that. But nevertheless, it was an interesting exploration. We're seeing other frameworks trying to sort of converge, moving towards that direction in the form of Svelte 5, right? So Vue is also probably the only framework that supports both template-based and virtual DOM render function-based authoring of your component rendering logic, because we do compile templates into virtual DOM render functions underneath. And we also pioneer the concept of the progressive framework, a coherent but incrementally adoptable layers of different libraries, utilities built on top of Vue core that you can use as much or as little as you need. So this gives Vue great flexibility to be used in different use cases. You can use it over a CDN and just enhance back-end rendered pages. Essentially, a lightweight replacement of jQuery. Or you can use the whole thing. You can do as much as you want. You can build a simple SPA, or you can go full stack with Nuxt. Right? So I think this form of structuring the different pieces inside a framework ecosystem has also pretty much becoming something that people want instead of a purely monolithic thing where there's no opportunity for you to pick and choose or take individual pieces out. So enough of talking about what we achieved. I kind of want to take a step back and look at the early days where we started. So a brief timeline actually, let's do a simple poll. Like, how many of you started using Vue in the last 2 years? Okay, the last 5 years? Okay, how many of you have been with Vue since its beginning? Quite a few, actually. Great, great. So, yeah, so the first release of Vue with the name Vue in it was in 2013, but that was not really ready for public use yet. The first public announcement, as I said, was in February 2014, almost exactly 10 years ago. And we reached 1.0 in 2015, 2.0 in 2016, which is also the year I started working on Vue full-time. And work on 3.0, the whole 3.0 arc is much longer. Early stage research started in 2018, soft launch in 2020. And eventually 3.0 became the default, January 2022, which is more than 2 years ago. Again, that sounds quite amazing, because I still feel like that's just yesterday. And 2.0 reached the end of life in December 2023. So this is a very, very brief timeline. And I still have this blog post up somewhere talking about the first week of launching Vue.js. And I remember the stats in the blog post talking about getting a few hundred GitHub stars, and I was over the moon about that. And we had different channels, like I posted to Reddit, I posted to a blog, JavaScript blog back then called Badass.js. And yeah, just thinking about the humble beginning, things have certainly changed a lot. But there were also ups and downs, right? So we've kept growing and growing, but there were also times during this whole period where things didn't really go as planned, or I was simply burned out. Many of you have probably heard about the technology adoption cycle, where whenever a new technology comes out, there's initial trigger, then there's this peak of inflated expectations, aka hype. People are excited about it. People think it's going to be the best thing ever. It's going to be the future. But then when you start to using it in production, you realize, okay, maybe it's not ready yet. There are this problem, these problems. And as a maintainer, you also kind of getting all these feedback throw you into this trial of disillusionment, where people realize, oh, maybe it's not as good as it was claimed to be. But if you persist through, you eventually reach the slope of enlightenment, and then finally, plateau of productivity. So I would say involvement in open source. When you create an open source project, as a maintainer, you would also go through a very similar process. Right? When you first get into open source, when you publish your first project, how many of you have published an open source project? Do you remember the excitement when you hit the publish button for the very first time? You're putting something out there for the world to see. And for the next couple of weeks, you'll probably be in this really peak of excitement and output. You're looking at every single issue coming in. You're looking at every single comment on Hacker News or Reddit. You're trying to just respond to people. You're trying to fix all the issues. You're trying to make sure your thing is the best thing ever. But inevitably, if it actually gets popular, inevitably, there will be real problems revealed. And you realize, oh, like, I never thought of this before. Maybe the idea isn't great after all. Maybe there's something wrong with this whole premise. Maybe this is just a shitty library I shouldn't have even put out there. And you start doubting yourself. You start doubting the very existence of your library. And you have to manage to cross the chasm to realize, okay, like, it's okay for your thing to not be perfect. It's okay that maybe it's not going to fix everyone's problem, but it's good enough that it fixes someone's problem. And you'll have you'll regather the energy and confidence to keep improving it and eventually reach the plateau of productivity. So there are some really, real examples. If you look at my GitHub contribution graph from like way back, February 2014, that was the first 2 months of publishing Vue. I was super excited. I was basically responding to every single issue. But then from April to June, I was pretty much given up. I was like, okay, maybe this thing is, I just put it out there. It's fine. If people don't want to use it, it's fine. But then after a while, I started working on it again, this time with much less sort of unrealistic expectations of what it should become. Because at that time, I was like, yeah, I don't want it to be the biggest framework in the world. It's fine. Like, I'll just improve it for my own use, for the existing users who are happy with it. And there are periods where it's real burnout, or I'm just like doubting myself. There can be multiple reasons. Sometimes I'm just overwhelmed with the amount of bugs that people are reporting. Then I started doubting my capability as an engineer. I'm like, why am I writing so many bugs? Sometimes it's just people saying nasty things on Reddit. This has happened multiple times. Or some competitors come out and say, we've solved the biggest problem in JavaScript. We are going to be the next big thing. And you're like, oh, shit, another one. So inevitably, things happen. But and if you look at the longer graph, there are multiple times. There are also things happening in life, getting married, having kids, moving between countries, or being locked down during COVID. So there are multiple times where my graph isn't really green. I think it's important to acknowledge this. Like, even from the outside, it looks like I've done a lot of things, right? I'm not always productive, and I think that's fine. You don't need to be grinding all the time to do great things. The important here is recognizing that I managed to bounce back every time. Sometimes it took longer, sometimes it took shorter. But it's a process, and it's sort of a self-learning process. Every time when you enter a period of burnout, I'm basically trying to learn more about myself, what causes me to go into that state, and what would help me to go out of it, right? So every time I go out of it, I learn more about myself. I learn more about how to think about working on open source. And it's a learning and growing process. So, and more importantly, it wouldn't have been possible to carry through all these downslopes without the support from the amazing Vue community, right? I'm putting the word up here 3 times because that's how important it is. If I were Steve Ballmer, I'd be like, community, community, community. Yeah. Well, But to be serious, the Vue community is really the one single thing that I'm most proud of during this whole journey. Vue is about, right, open source is about people. Vue is about people. Vue community is the most diverse, inclusive, and welcoming group of people that I've known. It's because of the existence of the community that it makes me feel, I have the motivation and I have a reason to keep doing this. Right? So without the community, I would never have been able to have the persistence to keep working on Vue for 10 years. Right? So here's my deepest gratitude to our team members, to the contributors, to all the maintainers of our libraries in the ecosystem, to our community partners, amazing people organizing this conference and other Vue conferences in the world. Vue advocates, people are just saying nice things about Vue, helping each other out on Discord. And of course, our sponsors. So, thank you. So, speaking of sponsors, I think another important aspect about Vue is that we managed to find a pretty good balance between sustainability, independence, and being able to support people working on things, right? We've been doing this for 10 years without any major corporate backing. And in fact, if you look at the framework landscape, Vue is currently the only mainstream framework that remains independent, i.e. not dominantly owned or backed by a single corporation. We're proud to have found this model to support the continued maintenance and development of the framework. And more importantly, within this model, sponsors or the people who are giving the project money do not have control power on the technical direction of it, which I think is really important because this allows us to really focus solely on the needs of the users, the needs of the developers. It also gives us, the maintainers, the flexibility to align our interest and passion with those needs so we don't fall into the trap of doing things we don't really want to do just because for the money. Most of contributors or team members who've stuck with Vue through all this time are doing it because they genuinely enjoy doing things in open source. They enjoy being involved in something that makes everyone's life better. So it's more than just taking salary for a job. And I think that's another really important aspect. So also, thanks to this kind of independence of the project, that allows the team and our whole ecosystem to take a really open-minded stance towards cross-framework features or cross-framework efforts. So there's this really collaborative mindset. We're not doing things only to benefit Vue the framework, because we're not a for-profit organization. We're not trying to maximize return for investors. We're here to just make things better for developers, and not just limited to Vue developers, right? There are multiple notable efforts that rooted from the Vue ecosystem, but ended up benefiting more than just Vue developers, right? Some great examples like Vite, right? Vite started as something only for Vue, but we eventually made it framework agnostic, and now it's probably the biggest thing driving all the new generation of meta frameworks out there. Volar is the base of our language support. So if you use Vue single-file components in VS Code, 5 years ago the support was not really great. But nowadays, you can get full TypeScript IntelliSense, auto-completion, type checking in your Vue templates, just like you would get from TS or TSX. Right? So all of this is thanks to Volar. And similar to Vite, Johnson, who's the creator of Volar, decided to abstract the underneath layer of Volar into a cross-framework support framework. So it's a lower-level framework that supports language services for different frameworks. So it can be used to support Vue single-file components, or Astro components, or embedded languages. Say you want to get IntelliSense for embedded CSS inside a TypeScript file. You can do that with Volar. I think MDX, which is the thing that embeds JSX inside MD files, is also using Volar for its language support. So again, a great example of something we needed for Vue, but eventually benefiting other frameworks or other languages. And other great examples, on JS coming from the Nux team, right? A lot of people have know or used packages from this collection, and Nitro, which powers Nux underneath. We're seeing other frameworks being built on top of it as well. And then I know Anthony has ideas about abstracting things about underneath Nux dev tools to support other kind of dev tools, which is also exciting. So I think this is a trend, and this is a good thing that we're really proud of. And interestingly, I think Vue is the only community to have so many of these things popping out. So we want to keep this trend going. I think it's great. OK, so now let's take a look at the current and future of Vue itself. Some interesting stats. Vue 3 usage has increased by 72% over the past year. So, and among all Vue downloads, Vue 3 has officially crossed the half threshold. So now it makes up 56% total. And this number has been growing very fast since Vue 2 went ELL. So 3.4 was released in December 2023, so just 2 months ago. And the cool thing is, despite Vue being a 10-year-old framework, we're still constantly working on these lower-level improvements. So we completely rewrote the parser for V3. Now the new parser is twice as fast. We also had great big internal refactors of our reactivity system. Right? So the parser, compiler, and the reactivity system are really the backbone, the lower-level pieces of what makes Vue Vue. But over time, the code base will show its age, and we're not really afraid of just thinking about how we can refresh the internals. So it's like you are on a plane, and we're just like swapping out the engine to a new one, but make it faster. So both of these changes are pretty significant. It makes things more efficient, just makes everything run faster under the hood. But our goal is to not really cause any impact on your running code that should be already running. Obviously, there were a few regressions in 3.4 that we caught, and we tried to fix them. And we have invested a lot in the ecosystem CI, which allows us to run significant changes against a lot of these ecosystem libraries like Vuetify or Radix Vue or Nuxt to make sure we don't break things. So this is always going to be a focus for the whole Vue 3 lifecycle. We also stabilized define model, shipped features like vbind same name shorthand. So if you've been using 3.4, you probably have been using these features. And there are more that we are planning. So in the upcoming 3.5, there are a few things that's the focus. So first is even more reactivity efficiency improvements. There are two important PRs currently already merged in the minor branch. The first one is yet another refactor of the reactivity system that decreases overall memory usage of our reactivity system by over half. So if you're interested, you can take a look at the PR afterwards and see the exact numbers. Another one is an improvement to the reactivity system when interfacing with large reactive arrays. So previously, our reactivity system, because we used proxies, there are a lot of property access overhead when you iterate over a huge reactive array wrapped with a proxy. But we managed to find a way through this great pull request to cut off a lot of these overheads. And some iterations can become 10 times faster in comparison. And then we're going to focus on some server-side improvements, lazy hydration, stabilized suspense, and use ID, which allows you to get a stable ID that's shared between your server render and your client. Vapor mode. I know a lot of you are keen to want to get an update on it. So there are great progress being made. Kevin, unfortunately, who isn't here, has been working really hard on Vapor mode, and it can now run to do MVC. So it also has a playground where you can just paste in the Vue component and see how it compiles in Vapor mode and compare it to how it compiles in today's Vue. So you can try it out in the playground, and we've been running the new Vapor mode against benchmarks as well. The current focus is performance tuning and improving the code generation strategies, making sure that the generated code of your components stays small and don't really get bloated. And next is, for Vapor mode, the next big focus is getting component models properly sorted out. And the priority here is you want components in Vapor mode to be as low overhead as possible. So, whether you are creating 100 component instances or 10,000 component instances, it should not make your app extremely slow just because there are too many components. And more development experience improvements, we want to further improve Vite by investing in lower-level toolchains. So I talked about Rowdown a while ago, and it's been in the works for quite some time now. And we just finished a big refactor, and we completed tree shaking support. And at this point, Rowdown is able to perform basic bundling to bundle most Java CJS and ESM sources. And in our preliminary benchmarks, it's actually twice as fast compared to ESBuild, which is a pretty big feat. But caveats, it's not feature complete yet. There are other things we need to add into it. There are things like scope hoisting or just more advanced tree shaking features or minification, source maps. There are many things lacking, but the stats, the performance right now is super promising. And Rowdown is aimed to have a fully roll-up compatible plugin interface, which means eventually our goal is to use Rowdown to replace both ESBuild and Rollup inside Vite. So all your current apps running on Vite will seamlessly get a lot faster, both in development and in production builds. And lower down, Rowdown is built on top of a Rust-based toolchain called OXC, which at the core is an extremely fast Rust-based JavaScript parser. And on top of OXC, there are also toolchains, other tools like OXLint, which is the linter based on OXC. There are going to be TypeScript transforms in OXC. So you can see where this is going, because once the TypeScript transforms and minification features are complete in OXC, Rowdown can leverage that directly because it's built on top of OXC. And this allows us to collapse all these different tasks that deals with your JavaScript and TypeScript source into a single tool, so the AST never leaves the Rust process. Compared to today, when you're building a Vue application today, your source is actually parsed by 5 different things from beginning to end. It goes through the Vue Babel parser, it goes through ESBuild, it goes through Rollups parser, then goes through ESBuild again, then finally gets minified by Terser. Right, so that's like at least 5 different parse phases. We want to collapse those and make sure that the whole process is as efficient as possible. But all this work is going outside of the scope of the Vue team. There's a separate team that's focusing on these things, which I'm also a part of and involved with. But we'll share more details about those later in the year. And we are trying to extract reusing layers between Nux and Vue DevTools, and Johnson is still actively working on further improvements in Volar v2, which should get rid of the need for what we nowadays call takeover mode. It should allow us to basically reduce the memory usage of Volar, slash it by half. So that is the goal of Volar v2. And so in other words, we're far from done, despite the 10 years, right? If you think about 10 years, you'd think Vue is a pretty old framework by now. But we are still doing a lot of interesting things. We're still refreshing the internals. We experienced a period of fragmentation during the Vue 2 to 3 transition. But now that Vue 2 is officially end of life, the Vue 3 ecosystem is thriving. With higher quality utilities, component libraries, custom renderers, meta frameworks, everything is better and more exciting and active than ever before. And we're here to support more of this happening in the coming years. So as a framework, Vue has survived through the JavaScript hype cycles, right? Vue is here to really focus to help you get your job done. We're not here to trying to sell you on a paid solution of something. And we are proud that we've stayed true to that statement ever since the day one of the project, right? We may not be the most trendy thing nowadays, but we're here to stay. and we're always going to be improving, one thing at a time. Thank you.